So in some ways I feel like I never quite exited sort of an ongoing dialogue I was having with the public, whether through Sleater-Kinney or I felt like Monitor Mix, which was my blog for NPR, was in some ways a continuum, although in a different medium, and certainly I think had kind of dismantled that automatic hierarchy that exists when you're standing on stage. Like, writing a blog where you have an automatic interaction and ease with your readership. Yeah, I think it created not only a conversation, but it did kind of foment my desire to play again. Because after a while, I just thought, why am I still writing about it? I just want to play. But it took a couple years, and I really had no interest in playing music right after Sleater-Kinney ended the first time.
Had you been doing that kind of writing?
I always felt like people asked me to write about Sleater-Kinney, write about my experience, sort of concomitant to actually playing music. I kept contributing essays to music anthologies or writing for newspapers, just short form pieces. So yes and no.
Right.
But certainly I guess it kind of catered to my analytical mind.
Did you ever do much fanzine writing back then?
No, I really never did. So. Yeah, I was. I think. Yeah, that's a good question, and something I've actually never thought about. But no, I never was interested. I never felt the urge to contribute to fanzine culture. I was an avid reader of them, but yeah, right. That like sort of applying my own experience to a fanzine, it felt like there are so many landmines.
You write about that so well in the book, like the getting zined. I mean, that's one of, there's some really great passages that I think you describe. The landmines.
It was kind of an early version of, and a much more, I guess, lengthy, thought out critique of what happens like every second and every hour on Twitter. Where you insert yourself into this conversation,
right, and
then you're suddenly inundated with ire and hate and offensive retorts. I think the nice thing about a discourse that's taking place in the context of a fanzine is someone has taken some time
right.
to write out their counter argument.
Right, right.
So it's not just this impulsive knee-jerk reaction, but in some ways it was kind of an early form of that. I think what social media is trying to do, which is create sort of a back and forth,
a conversation.
Yeah, it just is a little clunkier.
Yeah, and also in a fanzine, you are also speaking to a much smaller world,
yes,
as opposed to Twitter, where anybody.
Yeah, I mean, potentially with the fanzine, you're only speaking to 12 people or less. Right. Your roommates.
Right.
Like, hey guys, I put out a fanzine. I'm just going to put it on the kitchen counter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Did you journal, or do you keep a journal or a diary? Or?
I do intermittently. I did have a lot of sort of epistolary friendships back when I was touring, and a lot of what I did for the book was kind of ask for some of those letters back to the friends that I am still in touch with.
Right.
And that was kind of my version of keeping a tour diary. Although often, because I am very particular about what I want to send out into the world, I actually had notebooks that were like the early drafts of the letters, with things, because when you letter write, I was like, it looks so ugly to cross something out. So I would often have sort of the original, half-formed letter. And then I kept a lot of notebooks with just ideas, like not formal journal writing. But just, here's lyric ideas, here's notes from a book I'm reading, and that all served as demarcations of, what I was thinking at certain times.
Right.
But yeah, no, I'm not a diarist like Samuel Pepys or something.
Right.
or even Virginia Woolf, or those people that keep a set of copious diaries.
And what did you also have emails, or was it pretty much like physical letter writing?
Eventually, yeah, I had emails.
Right.
But for a while I really liked sending, postcards, and so that it felt very site-specific, contextual. Here's the stationery from this crappy hotel, here's a postcard from South Dakota. You know, it really kind of puts you on the map. And I think for the people receiving the letters, it actually feels like this is from a place, not from this sort of vague,
right.
you know, email. But yes, the ease of email. I'm not a Luddite. Like I loved email when it came to be.
So what made you decide to write this book?
I think I wanted to tell the story of youth and sort of becoming an artist and musician, and but it was mostly a story of kind of going from feeling like I was on the fringe and on the margins and feeling disembodied to a place of embodiment and belonging, and how that happened ostensibly through community and creativity, and how that was the conduit for kind of finding out who I was and who I wanted to be. That seemed like a story that could be couched within the context of my childhood and Slater-Kinney, and it was sort of already there. So it wasn't going to be a book, you know, that I feel like when I think of a memoir, you think of like assessing your whole life, but this was a particular story that I wanted to tell, and I felt like I had enough distance to tell that.
What role did sort of writing and then acting and sketch comedy play in making you feel more comfortable, right?
I think just sort of adding color to my world in this way, where I felt like I only had like a certain set of paints with Slater-Kinney, you know, and there, I think contextually we did come out of a strident community where you felt like, you know, in some ways, issue-wise, it was very black and white. You know, the concept of selling out was very clear. The concept of ambition and success were troublesome. You know, so you feel like you're kind of given this limited palette, and certainly we pushed against that and tried to, you know, navigate our own path, which we certainly did. But there was something really wonderful about leaving that behind, and just realizing that there were sort of more, there was a vividness that I kind of hadn't been able to explore yet, and a levity and satire and absurdity and ways of actually processing Slater-Kinney and, you know, and Riot Girl and indie rock and, you know, all of this sort of the ideologies that, you know, we were so entrenched in, you couldn't even really see outside of yourself or outside of your scene. Portlandia really allowed me to do that in a way that allowed me to critique it, but also have a newfound fondness for, you know, how that was very formative. So yeah, I think it actually made me just, the perspective was really wonderful.
I think it's interesting because I think there's a cliche that I'm sure I've bought into too, that being on stage with a guitar is like more empowering than being, you know, at the other side of a camera. And I feel like maybe that's, maybe that wasn't true for you, or I don't know, like how was it different? It's so much easier to be objectified behind a camera than on a stage, but I think maybe you had a different experience.
Well, I think they both contributed to feeling like I had a sense of self, or feeling empowered. I mean, certainly there was, it's a different dynamic because I always play guitar in the context of this sort of gang, you know, where you have Janet Weiss on drums and Corin Tucker on guitar with her very powerful voice, and I was sort of a part of that statement and that sound, but it wasn't necessarily my point of view. I mean, it was a collection of ideas and philosophies, and it was a conversation that we each had a small part in to create something really powerful. And so I think that was so much about collaboration, whereas Portlandia, even though it was also a collaboration with Fred Armisen, I think in some ways I felt more exposed, and so I think that kind of furthered my sense of confidence, you know. And you're also kind of unmasked, you know. I mean, when someone's doing stand-up comedy or somebody's doing like acoustic music, you know, you feel very vulnerable, but we really had the shield of of volume.
Right.
And that's something that I really needed in terms of the cathartic quality, the galvanizing quality, but it's also something you can kind of hide behind. And so I think being in front of the camera, there was a certain sense of exposure that I think I had to come to terms with that actually helped me to kind of start shedding, like that kind of fear of being judged or caring what other people thought. That comes with age too, but you know, I think, for me, I think it was a combination, because I am, I don't know, I like multitasking, and I feel like this allowed me a mode of critique that I guess I didn't really want to apply to Sleater-Kinney all the time. I just wanted to do the music.
And how does Transparent fit into your trajectory, and what is that experience like for you too? Yeah,
I think with Transparent, the really freeing thing was having it be a project that I was not the creator of. So just putting my trust in somebody else's vision, in this case, Jill Soloway. She's an excellent writer. She surrounds herself with an amazing staff. The cast is unreal, so talented. So it is that cliche of just like playing with, against somebody that's better than you and learning and having the Barbie set quite high. So I really enjoyed that, and that experience was very new for me in terms of, just doing something that I hadn't written. I felt like I could just kind of sink into it a little bit, and take risks in a different way, because I didn't have to think like with Portlandia or even Sleater-Kinney. I'm always thinking partially as a writer, and to completely turn that off and just perform, it can happen, but because it's a lot of it's improvised with Portlandia, I'm often thinking like, well, what could I do differently?
It's interesting because of course there's been so much attention on how difficult it's been for women to make their way in film and television, as everything in the world, but particularly there's been a spotlight, shall we say, on that. But I feel like right now there's probably, obviously Transparent gives all these opportunities to women directors and writers. Do you feel that glass ceiling in Hollywood in terms of?
I sense it, and I feel it. Again, I came up through like a sort of rarefied environment, like more analogous to somebody like Lena Dunham, where you sort of don't see yourself somewhere and you create a space for yourself. I'm totally aware that not everyone has had that opportunity or that privilege to be able to do that, and there's plenty of other women that are trying to do that and that have hit roadblocks, people not giving them opportunities, or or even undermining them, or sort of doubting their capabilities. So I think there is like a more endemic problem, and I have definitely been around writers' rooms where people just don't even think about hiring women or people of color or diverse. It's just, I think if you are used to a certain mode and there's a precedent of a certain mode, then it's easy to just think that it's okay to stay in there. So I think it's really, it's been people like Ava DuVernay or Shonda Rhimes or Jill Soloway who have just said like, no, we're going to hire women, we're going to hire people of color, and we're not going to just, like engage with the status quo anymore. You have to be pretty deliberate about it, I think. And so my own experience has not been one of frustration, but I've definitely seen it. I've seen how easy it is to not do what Jill or Shonda are doing.
So is not living in Portland year round, is that going to give you good distance for Portlandia? And are you going to start writing Silver Lake Gandia? Or
we've always felt like Portlandia was kind of a microcosm of many places. It was very representational. It was more of a mindset.
Right.
It's part of an ongoing conversation I think that people have about their relationship to where they live and the kind of choices they make, and whether those choices are sort of bettering our cities, or if they're just kind of playing into gentrification or privilege, or if the concerns we have feel, like kind of special,
right?
Versus like when you look out into the world and you realize, oh, most people aren't just worried about you know, the conversation between whole milk and half at a coffee shop, or local versus organic, like there are bigger problems. So I think people are starting to, I don't know, just kind of question, you know, whether we've kind of sorted ourselves away from progress and away from coexistence. So at the root of it, ideally, Portlandia is having that conversation, not just what's happening, what's wacky in Portland.